Have you ever stopped and just wondered, what makes you, you? I mean, why are some of us total social butterflies while others would rather just curl up with a good book? Well, today, we're going to dive deep into some of the biggest theories of personality to try and figure that out.
No, really. Think about it for a sec. Is it your hidden thoughts, the way you act, your feelings? What's the common thread? The consistent patterns that make you the person you are. And where in the world did all that come from? That right there, that's the giant puzzle of personality. Okay, so to make sure we're all on the same page, let's start with a classic definition. Now, the key words here are dynamic, because it means you're always changing, you're not static, and psychophysical. That's just a fancy way of saying it's a mix of your mind and your body. So, personality is basically this organized, constantly evolving system inside you that creates your own unique way of being in the world. And our first stop on this tour has to be with the guy who first tried to draw a map of that inner world, Sigmund Freud. His big idea, the psychodynamic view, was that the most important parts of who we are actually hidden from us, buried deep in our unconscious mind.
According to Freud, when we're born, we're basically all id. This is that raw, primal instinct-driven part of us that runs purely on the pleasure principle. It's the little baby inside of all of us screaming, "I want it, and I want it now," with zero concern for reality.
Right, but you can't always get what you want, can you? And that's where the ego steps in. The ego is the part of you that has to function in the real world. It's kind of like the manager, trying to get the id what it wants, but in ways that are realistic and, won't get you arrested or fired.
And then finally, we've got the superego. This is your moral compass. It's the voice of your parents, your teachers, and society, all internalized, telling you what's right and what's wrong. It's the part that makes you feel guilty. So for Freud, your personality is pretty much this constant raging battle between what you want, what's possible, and what you should do. So how does the poor ego manage all this stress and conflict? Well, it uses what Freud called defense mechanisms. These are little unconscious tricks our mind plays to keep us from feeling anxious. For instance, with projection, instead of admitting, "Wow, I'm really angry," you might say, "Why are you so angry at me?" It's a way of pushing your own feelings onto someone else. Now, as huge as Freud's ideas were, they ran into a big problem. How do you scientifically prove what's happening in the unconscious? The short answer is you can't. And this issue, the fact that it was all untestable, sparked a major pushback and led to a totally different way of thinking. And that brings us to the behaviorists. They basically said, forget all this internal, invisible mind stuff. Let's focus on what we can actually see and measure. For them, personality isn't something you're born with. It's something you learn from your environment, from your experiences in the world. And they laid out a few key ways we learn to be who we are. Maybe you learn to be anxious around dogs because one bit you when you were little. Or you learn to be hardworking because you get praised and good grades when you study. And of course, a huge one is just learning by watching others. You see how your parents act and you imitate them. Later on, a psychologist named Albert Bandura refined this idea. He said, it's not just a one-way street where the environment shapes you, it's a two-way street. He called it reciprocal determinism. Think about it. Your personality influences your behavior, which affects your environment, which then circles back and affects your personality. If you're a friendly person, you smile at people, they smile back, and that reinforces your friendly nature. It's a constant feedback loop. But for some psychologists, both of these views felt a little bleak. I mean, are we really just puppets of our unconscious desires, like Freud said? Or are we just robots who react to rewards and punishments? This feeling of dissatisfaction is what really paved the way for a whole new perspective. And that new perspective was humanistic psychology. It was called the third force because it was a direct reaction against the other two. The humanists wanted to put the focus back on what they saw as the best parts of being human: our potential to grow, our free will, and our deep need to find meaning in our lives. One of the big names here was Carl Rogers, and he was really focused on our idea of the self. He said we all have two selves. There's the real self. That's who you actually are, warts and all. And then there's the ideal self. That's the person you dream of being. For Rogers, a healthy, happy person is someone where that gap between the real and the ideal is pretty small. So how do you close that gap? Rogers had a beautiful answer: unconditional positive regard. It's basically being loved and accepted for exactly who you are with no strings attached. No, I'll love you if. Think about a parent's love for their child. That's the kind of total acceptance Rogers believed was absolutely essential for us to grow and become our true selves.
Now, as inspiring as the humanistic view is, modern psychology has really moved towards a more scientific, more measurable approach. And this brings us to what are called trait theories. The goal here is pretty straightforward. Describe personality by identifying the stable, core characteristics or traits that make us who we are. So after decades of research, psychologists have more or less agreed on a model called the Big Five. The idea is that you can capture the vast majority of human personality by looking at just 5 major dimensions. And lucky for us, there's a super handy acronym to remember them: OCEAN. So O is for openness, how open you are to new experiences. C is for conscientiousness, how organized and disciplined you are. E is for extroversion, basically how much you get your energy from being around other people. A is for agreeableness, how cooperative and kind you are. And finally, N is for neuroticism, which is really about emotional stability. The key is that we all fall somewhere on a spectrum for each one of these. And a huge question is, where do these traits even come from? Well, turns out you can thank your parents for about half of it. Twin studies have consistently shown that about 50% of the variation we see in these personality traits comes directly from our genes. Okay, so if personality can be broken down into these measurable traits, that leads to a really practical question. How do we actually measure it? Let's take a quick look at the tools of the trade that psychologists use. There are really 2 main camps here. On one side, you have self-report inventories. These are really direct. They just ask you questions about yourself. On the other side, you have projective tests, which are a bit of a throwback to Freud. The goal there is to tap into your unconscious by having you interpret something that's totally ambiguous. A famous example of a self-report test is the MMPI. It's super straightforward. You get a whole bunch of true/false statements, just like these, hundreds of them, and the pattern of your answers helps build a detailed profile of your personality. And the most famous projective test, of course, is the Rorschach ink blot test. I'm sure you've seen it. You're shown a weird, symmetrical ink blot, and you're simply asked, what might this be? The whole idea is that your answer isn't really about the ink blot. It's a projection of your own hidden thoughts, your own conflicts, your own personality. So what's the takeaway here? Well, it's that your personality is this incredibly complex thing. It's part your deep past, part your learned habits, part your desire to grow, and part your biological blueprint. Each one of these theories is just a different lens, a different tool to help us understand ourselves. So the real question isn't which theory is right, it's what can each of them teach you about the person you are right now, and maybe the person you hope to become.